Story 1. The brown part of bread does not contain nutrients. It is just the more cooked outer layer. My brother lied to me to get me to eat the crust when I was a kid. Story 2. I have a memory from when I was 6 of an old man cracking jokes with the kids and spitting his dentures into his food. I thought it was hilarious and knew his name was Frank. I casually mentioned it to my grandmother. It turned out I was remembering my great-grandfather, and that day was my great-grandmother's funeral. Story 3. My dad used to occasionally burst out with one line of a song, said Barnacle Bill the sailor. He only ever sang that line. When I was 6, I asked him why. He said it was an old drinking song that was absolutely filthy and that I was too young to hear the rest. This continued once or twice a year until I was 18. When I told him I was an adult and asked him to tell me the rest, he looked up from the newspaper, sighed, folded it and said, "The truth is I can never remember the rest of the song." Then he went back to reading the newspaper. Story 4. Not the biggest mystery, but one day my friend was at my house playing video games. My mom called us into her room to help flip the mattress, which we did. We then went to another friend's house. My mom called that friend and said there were two $20 bills on top of the dresser and asked if he had taken them. I said no. I asked my friend and he also said no. About 5 minutes later, my friend asked if we wanted to go to the toy store because he had $40 in two $20 bills. I said yes, we went and he bought me a yo-yo. Took me years to finally realize that my friend had stolen the money. Story 5. The entire time I lived in my childhood home, my mom hid my Christmas presents in her secret hiding place. She made it sound mystical and mysterious. A few months ago, after I moved out, she finally told me what the secret hiding place actually was. The Christmas tree box in a cabinet in the garage. She would replace the Christmas tree with my presents when she put the tree up. Story 6. Growing up, I always insisted I liked the mashed potatoes at my grandma's house better than the ones my mom made at home. My grandma once told me it was because she used a special recipe. I found out last year that my mom hand mashes her potatoes. My grandma just buys the Betty Crocker boxed mix. Her special recipe turned out to be Betty Crocker. Story 7. I remember being about 8 and in the car with my dad. I was in the front seat and we were driving somewhere when this song came on the radio. He turned it up and said it was the best guitar playing ever. He really jammed out, which was uncharacteristic because he was usually so stoic. It was the only time I heard the song, and he died before I could ever ask him what song it was. When I asked around, no one knew what on earth I was talking about or what song I meant. So I had this melody in my head for years. But how do you look up a song that has no lyrics? For years this song stayed on the back burner in my brain. I was afraid to forget it. Somehow the story resurfaced when I was about 26, chatting with my husband, and we searched YouTube for best guitar songs. After about 15 minutes, we found it. Cliffs of Dover was the song I had burned into my brain on repeat for 16 years. Now I jam out to it with my kids. Thank you so much for the kind words and awards. I'm speechless at how big this post got. Thank you. Story 8. When I was in elementary school, I always wondered what the teacher's lounge was like. It seemed mysterious, and I tried to peek whenever the door was open. Later, when I became a teacher, I can confirm they are dull, often toxic spaces filled with cranky teachers complaining about students. Story 9. When I was about 4 or 5, my family had a pet turtle. One day it went missing and my parents told me it had climbed the wall in our backyard and gone to the creek behind our house. As a naive toddler, I did not question this. Years later, when I was 17 and driving with my mom, we saw a tortoise crossing the street, and I was suddenly thrown back to that memory. I pulled over to save the tortoise and shouted, "Oh my God! Turtles can't climb walls. What happened to our turtle?" I later learned that our turtle had burrowed a hole in the lawn, and my dad did not notice it until after he had accidentally run it over with the lawnmower. It was easier for them to tell me it had climbed the wall than to admit what had happened. In short, my parents lied to me about our missing pet. I found out it had been accidentally killed by my father. Story 10. As a kid, my dad would call me from the other side of the house to bring him something to drink from the kitchen. He always drank from a straw, And in first grade, I started getting annoyed, so I began poking a tiny hole in his straw as a small act of revenge. I did not confess until I was 22. The look on his face was priceless. He seemed to immediately go back to that moment and said, "Son of a gun, you didn't you?" He had thought we had simply bought cheap straws. Story 11. I solved a family mystery for my mom. I wasn't allowed to play console video games during the week until I was 18, but some nights I would really crave them, so I would quietly creep through the house into the basement where I could play in peace. About once every 30 times, one of my parents would need something from the basement. I would quickly turn off the television, hide in the guest room, and pray they didn't turn on a light or notice the Xbox was on. One night, I ducked into the guest room and hid behind the bed. To my horror, my mother followed me in and turned on the lights. I panicked, and when she started digging through the closet with her back to me, I ran. I nearly brushed her shirt. If she had seen me, I would probably have given her a heart attack, but I made it back to my bed. About 5 years later, my mother said, "You're such a quiet walker." I told her it was because of my basement trips, thinking I had nothing to lose. Her face went kind of solemn. When I explained, she said, "So there really was someone down there." She remembered that exact night and the feeling that there was a ghost in the room. Over the next couple of days, she would stare into space and say, "I can't believe you were really there." She seemed to get over it, but she probably checks empty rooms more carefully now. Story 12. I visited my father when I was 6 or 7 years old at the place where he worked, or so I was told. I remember saying it looked just like a prison, and the guards laughed at me. I was indeed visiting my father at Terminal Island Federal Correctional Institution, where he was a federal inmate. Story 13. Once when I was about 7 or 8, my family was having a pool party and my aunt in her 20s was sitting by the pool with a glass of clear liquid. I was hot and thirsty, so I reached for her drink and she said, "Don't drink that, it's pool water." I wondered why she would have a glass of pool water, but I left it alone. Years later, after I understood my family's drinking habits, I realized she was probably drinking vodka. Story 14. When I was a kid, my dad bought me one of those big candy cane containers filled with jelly beans. I was so excited to eat them, but I was told I had to wait until the next day. Later I asked for them, but they had apparently disappeared into thin air. I couldn't find my candy cane anywhere. A lot of strange things used to happen around our house, almost paranormal, and Dad said it was nothing. No, it was not. He ate my jelly beans. Story 15. Not sure if this is a mystery or not. My mother, who passed away in 2009, used to make a meatloaf every year on Groundhog Day. She always told us it was groundhog, and when I was a kid it just tasted like ground beef. I'm 33 now. Last year I mentioned it to my brother and asked where Mom got the groundhog because I wanted to make it for my son. My brother had no idea what I meant. He started laughing, then my wife and my son, who did not know why, started laughing too. Mom got me. Mystery solved. It was just regular meatloaf. Story 16. My mom used to call us in for dinner by yelling out the back door from the kitchen. I was in middle school before I realized the screen door was actually called a screen door. Story 17. We grew up poor. At age 10, my friends were having elaborate birthday parties with petting zoos, bounce houses, and clowns, so my resourceful mother decided I would have a sleepover for my 11th birthday. It was great, and we were going to make ice cream cones. We got all the supplies out with my mother, and she opened the box of cones. They were all smashed. She said we were not having regular ice cream but Magic Castle sundaes because the broken cones resembled the sections of a castle. We all thought this was great and ate them. When my friends went home, they asked their parents to make Magic Castle sundaes. 2 days ago, I learned my mother had been getting items past the sell-by date from behind the grocery store. They were not expired. She had no idea the cones were brown until she opened them in front of us. She quickly invented the Magic Castle idea, and we all loved it. It just goes to show how silly kids can be. Story 18. I live in the Deep South and grew up there. From my earliest memories until about age 8, we took a winter trip to Stowe, Vermont to see my grandparents. I had scary nights, hearing whales outside the windows. It was terrifying. My grandparents moved south and we stopped going. When I was in my 30s, I took another trip to Vermont. On the first night, I heard the same sounds. It turned out that the winter winds up north are very different from the winds of southern nights. My fear of the dark disappeared when I realized the source of the sound. Story 19. When I was very young, my siblings and I played in my grandparents' yard. My grandfather told us to stay away from the skunk hole at the edge of the yard. We lived in South Texas, so this was not out of the ordinary, and we avoided it like any other animal den. Years later, it dawned on me that it was actually the septic tank access. Story 20. My aunt punched her husband at the pool during a large family vacation because she discovered long-distance charges to the hotel room they shared for many calls to a woman he was known to think highly of. Story 21. I have significant gaps in my memories from childhood. They were inexplicable and unsettling, not just ordinary lapses of memory. I've experienced a few instances of this as an adult as well. It turns out I have a dissociative disorder, which can cause amnesia. Story 22. As a kid, I played Medal of Honor Allied Assault with my brother. We reached the 5th level, set in a rainy French city reminiscent of Saving Private Ryan. We always got stuck on the first objective, which was to locate the bazooka team. The giant rubble-filled city had poor visibility, and hidden enemy snipers kept firing, making the search nearly impossible. My brother and I scoured every nook and cranny but never found them. For months we reinstalled and replayed the game, only to get stuck on that level. Years later, I bought a digital copy of Allied Assault for nostalgia. I dreaded the 5th level, but to my surprise I cleared the first objective when I found the bodies of the bazooka team in a building. It turned out the compact disc we originally used was bugged and the bodies never rendered. We had wasted hours searching for people who never made it to the battle. Giddy at finally completing the game, I continued the level but quit after being repeatedly shot by hidden snipers. Story 23. One evening while camping, my brother caught a fish that we decided to keep alive in the cooler. The next morning we ran out to see the fish, and it had grown about 5 inches. We were so excited and had no idea how it could have grown that much overnight. Later, my dad said he had gotten up that morning and seen a raccoon take the fish. He spent the next hour frantically fishing for another one and caught the new fish, the first he was able to catch, just a few minutes before we woke up. I had never questioned the fish's apparent growth as I grew up, but after hearing what really happened, I felt we should have wondered about it more. Story 24. When I was 10, my godfather gave me $20 as a Christmas gift. At the end of dinner, the money had disappeared. For years, my parents blamed me for being irresponsible with my money. Years later, we discovered that my cousin's fiancée was a kleptomaniac after she was caught stealing items from my aunt's house. She had been the one who took the money. Story 25. My father used to take us camping, hiking, and on bike rides. He taught us about safety in the woods and on the water and how to navigate using maps. So it was not strange when, at about 10 years old, he suggested we play a game in which we were blindfolded and driven around. The object was to call out each turn by feel and, after about 30 minutes, guess roughly where we were and which direction home was. He was impressed with how well we did. We took off the blindfolds and went for a hike. I did not think much about it. Years later, I realized why he had us play the game. He worked in criminal psychology, focusing on sexual offenders. He was kidnap-proofing us in a lighthearted way so there would be no fear or trauma. Story 26. When I was 4, I vividly remember getting into my mother's car and her telling me that our cat had died. She said she had rushed him to the vet because he was shedding fur and something was seriously wrong. Despite her best efforts, he died. I never knew why it happened so suddenly, but I accepted it. Fast forward about 15 years. I am home from college for Christmas. On Christmas Eve, I am driving to the store with my father and uncle. They are talking about the cat my parents had gotten one Christmas. My father says that the cat was too aggressive, so he took it to a farm and gave it away. Normally, when a family pet dies, parents tell the child that it went to a farm upstate to ease the burden. Not my parents. They told me the horrifying truth even though it was not true. Story 27. I was watching Star Trek: The Next Generation with my dad when someone told Riker to wash his back. When I asked my father why someone would say that, he said, "So you can smell someone coming up behind you." It wasn't until years later that I understood how easy it was to hear watch as wash, and how committed my dad was to willfully deceiving his children for personal satisfaction. Story 28. John Travolta was actually John Travolta, which made a lot more sense. Story 29. When I was about 8, I answered our house phone. It was a man who asked to speak to my mom. He didn't ask for her by name. He said, "Could I speak to your mom, please?" I asked who it was, and he said, "It's Santa Claus." I was so excited and ran to my mom. I told all my friends for days that Santa Claus had called my house. This made me believe in Santa a few years longer than most kids. I was heartbroken when I found out Santa wasn't real. Years later, I asked my mom who had called that day and claimed to be Santa Claus. It was our Reverend. My mom was a deacon. He had known me for years, so he recognized my voice when I answered and knew how old I was. It had never occurred to me. Story 30. This is not mine but my husband's. I hope he does not see this because then my cover will be blown. He said that in middle school there was a time when he would be pulled out of class to shoot free throws in the gym, and it was only him. He did not think this was strange but did not understand why he was the only one who got to do that. It turned out his parents had told his teachers that he could not participate in sex education. Story 31. My dad used to say he could stop the rain for a moment by snapping his fingers. He'd do it in the car when it was pouring. I was so mesmerized that I told all my friends about it through late elementary school. I have since realized he'd snap as we drove underneath an overpass. Story 32. My dad is an ex-Catholic, and every night when he tucked me in until I left the house, he said, "We love you. God bless you. Good night." I always wondered why, since he had stopped going to church long ago. When I was 28, we watched an old Bruce Springsteen concert together, one of his favorite artists. At the end of his set, Bruce said, "We love you. God bless you. Good night." I turned to my dad and asked if that was why he had said it to me for years. He laughed and said, "I have no original material." Story 33. Who ate all the cherries in the cherry cake? I was blamed for years after someone picked them out and ate them during a family Christmas party. 8 years later, my little sister confessed that she had eaten them. Story 34. 4 years I wondered why my mom never ordered anything for herself and was never hungry when she took my sister and me out to eat. 25 years later, she told me she had been hungry and wanted to eat too, but she only had enough money to feed the two of us and did not want us to feel guilty. I love my mom so much. I did not expect this to become so widely seen. Thank you to the kind and appreciative strangers on Reddit. I just messaged my mom and thanked her for her kind, loving heart. Story 35. When I was a child in the 1970s, my parents worked in the Canadian Arctic but were from Nova Scotia. I had a pet mouse named Pixie, who died the night before our family flew home there for summer vacation. Many years later, I realized that it probably was not a sad coincidence. Story 36. I remember a time when I had to ask to play in the backyard with my siblings, so our mother could supervise us. We had never had to do this before, so we were confused, and whenever we went outside without asking, she punished us. It turned out the neighbors were harboring a known pedophile, which is why our mother was so strict about us going outside. I have no idea whether this man was on the run from the authorities. My mother probably did not know either. If she had known he was on the run, she would have notified the police. Our mother caught the man having sex with a teenager on our front lawn and called the police. I am not sure what happened after that. At that time, our neighbors did not have a child of their own. Story 37. My uncle, single with no children, lived a few houses away from my grandparents. My siblings and I would go between the houses and always loved his place because he had a huge tank of tropical fish and let us play video games. He was the most fun uncle, always taking us to the movies, amusement parks, fishing and golfing, and he kept us laughing. Over time, he became less comfortable with us dropping by, so we started sneaking into his house. We did not get far and he became angry. From then on, we only saw him at my grandparents' house. We used to joke with him about having a girlfriend over. 17 years later, he had a massive heart attack. While he was in the hospital, his sisters went into his house to look for paperwork and prepare it for his return. They found rooms full of empty bottles of cheap vodka. He had severe alcoholism for years and none of us knew it. Suddenly, many little things began to make sense. He died shortly thereafter of organ failure caused by alcoholism. He was not even 60. Story 38. When I was 4 years old, I found a snakeskin at my town's local park. My parents made me put it down. It wasn't a snakeskin. Story 39. When I was little, my perception of size and distance became distorted. Everything looked small and far away. I felt like a giant, yet my hands looked very small. This only happened at night. I would get up, go downstairs, walk around the kitchen for a bit, and then it would fade and I would go back to bed. I told my mom once that the windows were far away and she brushed it off. Many years later, I learned I had Alice in Wonderland syndrome. Children sometimes have it and usually stop around 10 to 12 years old. It is apparently harmless. Story 40. I had meningitis when I was 2 years old, and my baby brother had it too. He died. I had the viral form, he had the bacterial form. I grew up thinking I had it first and felt like I had given it to him and was the reason he died. I know, but you cannot help what you think, especially when you are a child. It was not until I was an adult that I learned he actually had it before me. I do not know why no one ever told me that. Perhaps they did not know I harbored this guilt because I kept everything inside. No one told me whether he died before I got it or while I was in the hospital. That part is still unclear to me. I was in the hospital for about 3 weeks, so it could have been before or during my hospital stay. Story 41. I used to go to our local Young Men's Christian Association after school and during the summer when I was a child. We went swimming in the pool almost every day, and, being a curious kid, I always wondered what was behind the caution doors with the triangle markings. 8 years later, I was working at the Young Men's Christian Association as a lifeguard. Behind the doors were old, smelly pool chemical testing rooms. It was very anticlimactic. Story 42. My father and sister used to play pranks on his secretary. When we grew up, he admitted he had been having an affair with her. It makes my skin crawl to think he used my oblivious little sister to flirt with the woman behind our mother's back. Story 43. Every time I saw a car that said sheriff, I believed it was the sheriff, probably because I watched too many westerns. I was a legit adult before I learned about the concept of a sheriff's department. In retrospect, I'm a dumbass. Edit. The replies to this comment are making me feel much less alone. Story 44. In preschool, I had a substitute teacher with a long little fingernail. I asked him why, and he said it just grew faster. Years later, I realized why. Story 45. I was no longer a child, but a few years earlier when my mother was terminally ill, my family received food gifts from many friends. Prepared dinners, baked snacks, and a restaurant gift card or two. The usual support people offer during tough times. I remembered Dad asking whether I had tried pastries we had received from some family friends. I will call them the Nelsons. I told him they were a little dry but very tasty, and he chuckled. The question and reaction stayed with me because they were odd. A couple of years later, while daydreaming as I drove home, I suddenly recalled that the Nelsons had suggested easing some of Mom's pain with marijuana, which they grew at home around that time. I had eaten marijuana cookies. I feel like an idiot for not realizing it, and I do not remember anything that happened after I ate the pastries. Story 46. I have 2 stories. 1. I found items in my mom's bathroom that I thought were cowtail candy, but they did not have the right label. I asked my mom what they were, and she said she would tell me when I was older. I realized around age 14 that they were tampons. 2. Steely Dan was playing, and I heard my dad ask my mom, "Do you know what a Steely Dan actually is?" Then he whispered to her. Killed me that I did not know, but I knew it was inappropriate and he would not tell me. Earlier this year, he finally told me that it is a slang term for a dildo. Story 47. How Sinterklaas made the Pepperniton fall through the ceiling. I quickly discovered Santa was not real when I was a kid, but I was certain that the Dutch version, Sinterklaas, was real. In December, Pepperniton, tiny Dutch cookies, would suddenly rain down on me, and I thought Santa Claus was on the roof dropping them through the ceiling. I was so convinced that I bragged to the kids in my class that my Santa was real and theirs was fake, and that the Dutch Santa only visits Dutch kids in America. Apparently my mom carried handfuls of peppermint in her pockets and, when I was not expecting it, she would throw them up into the air above me. I do not know how I did not realize what was going on at the time. The first year I was in on the secret and watched my mom throw peppermint on my brother, it seemed so obvious. Edit. I know that Sinterklaas is not exactly the same as Santa, and I know the difference between Kruidnitten versus Pepernitten. I was not trying to be technically accurate because I did not expect this to blow up. Thanks for the awards. Story 48. In kindergarten I had a guinea pig that turned into many guinea pigs after I babysat the class guinea pig for the Christmas break. Parents were thrilled. My teacher took the entire family to her house and was supposed to sell them, and I was supposed to get my original guinea pig back. They never returned. My parents told me they had all been sold together as one big happy family. I did not find out until I was about 25 that a coyote got into the cage and they were all eaten. This is the way. Story 49. When we were kids, we rode our bikes up the road to a horse ranch on a hill. In the distance was a large hill that was later bought and turned into a winery. The hill was covered in trees except for a bare area that faced us. One autumn afternoon my best buddy and I spotted something very furry walking on 2 feet from one tree to another. The hill was probably hundreds of yards away, and whatever we saw was clearly much larger than us. Because the sun was setting, it terrified us. We screamed down the road on our dirt bikes, riding away from whatever it was. Years later I learned that what we saw was likely a bear walking on its hind legs. For nearly a decade my friend and I would have sworn we had seen Bigfoot. Story 50. My grandmother is extremely religious. Despite that, she was surprisingly accepting of both my sister and me having children out of wedlock. It never made much sense why she was so understanding when I knew she did not approve. At my wedding, after the ceremony she called me over and put a ring in my hand. It was my late grandfather's wedding ring. It had been a gift, and I had worn it as my wedding band for many years. When I inspected it, I saw an engraving on the inside. My grandparents' initials and the date of their wedding. That date was after the day my mother was born. I realized she was rotten just like us, and I laughed. Story 51. Apparently when I was younger, around 3 to 5, I once put trash in my aunt's mailbox because I was too lazy to put it in the trash can. My aunt and my mom noticed and told me it was illegal and that the mailman knew and would have the police after me. For years when I visited my aunt, I hid whenever someone knocked on the door, which was rare because she lived on a hill. When the person left, they would tell me the coast was clear. When I asked who it was, they would say the police were looking for me. Took until I was about 10 to realize they were messing with me. Not sure if this counts as a mystery. Story 52. The smell of my neighbor's house when I was growing up was actually the smell of very strong marijuana. Story 53. I met my wife in college. When we were dating, she often mentioned that when she was a child she had a play doctor's kit that was stolen from her house. She had surgeries at a very young age, so her parents bought it for her to demystify the doctor's office. She would use it all the time on her dad, poking and prodding him. One day I asked about the robbery. Did they take everything? Jewelry? The television? Other valuables? No. Then it hit me. I asked, so someone broke into your house and only stole your doctor's kit, leaving anything worth fencing behind? Yeah, why? Did you ever consider your parents were tired of you using the kit on them all the time after you got better? Oh damn. We confirmed it with her dad later. But for 15 years she had believed a thief had broken in and taken only her beloved doctor's kit. Story 54. The random claps at midnight in my house weren't from ghosts, and they weren't claps either. Story 55. For more than 20 years I had a distinct memory of watching a black and white movie with my dad around the holidays in our living room. I was probably about 6 or 7 and remembered one specific scene vividly. For the longest time it bothered me. I would think about it periodically because I remembered it being so cool. I just wanted to know the movie so I could watch it as an adult. Then one day someone online described the movie and mentioned the name, which sounded very similar to what I remembered. I looked it up on YouTube and it turned out to be Babes in Toyland, also known as March of the Wooden Soldiers. The scene I remembered was all the soldiers marching out of the toy shop. Figuring this out was one of the most satisfying things I have ever felt. Story 56. I have pale white flecks in the center of my front adult teeth. Everyone I meet remarks on it when they see my smile up close for the first time. I found out about 2 years ago that it is caused by consuming too much fluoride before the adult teeth developed. It is called dental fluorosis. As a child, I used to swallow toothpaste rather than spit it out, and our water is fluoridated, so I suppose that is how I consumed that much fluoride. Postscript. Thanks for the silver. Second postscript. Thanks for the awards. Story 57. As a child, I had a bad dream that my parents locked me in my room by tying a rope between the doorknobs of my door and the bathroom door across the hall. It must have been a dream. My parents would never do that. Years later, I discovered they had done exactly that. I had terrible night terrors and would run screaming into their room. After so many sleepless nights, they could not handle it anymore. My door had no lock, so they used the rope solution. I eventually grew out of the night terrors. Story 58. I was brought up in Ireland, and unusually my parents never drank. Every Christmas our family friends would forget this and give my parents alcohol as gifts. My parents either threw the bottles of whiskey and vodka into the storeroom or regifted them. One year, when I was 8, my parents received a 40-year-old Scottish whiskey. It was a cool-looking bottle, so they placed it with pride on the mantelpiece. I grew older, taller, and a bit of a Jack the Lad. When I was 16, my parents decided to go out of town for the weekend. My brother, who was 18, suggested we pull an Ocean's 11 on the bottle and take it to a massive house party with lots of good-looking women. I warned him we would surely get caught because that bottle was the pride of the house. My brother, so cunning you could call him a weasel, explained that we would drink the finest whiskey this side of Bonnie, Scotland, take the empty bottle home, and refill it with cold Irish black tea. We did this and had an amazing time at the party. Mom and Dad came home none the wiser. Years went by and both my brother and I went to college. One Christmas we returned home and noticed straight away that the bottle was gone. We thought Mom was going to kill us, but nothing was said and we had a great Christmas. A few years later, when I was about 24, I was working in a hospital and often had lunch with the janitors, cleaners, and handymen. After a few months, one older Irish gentleman I got to know well said to me, "Young man, do you like whiskey?" I said, "Of course I do." He replied, "Let me tell you a story. Many years ago your father asked me to paint the outside walls of your home. When your father went to pay me for a hard day's work, I refused. Knowing that they don't drink, I remarked, 'Could I lift that 50-year-old bottle of fine Scottish whiskey?' Your father thought this was an amazing deal and I went home happy. My wife made me a steak and poured me a large glass of whiskey, and I sat on the porch on a lovely summer's day. Then I drank the bloody cold tea and nearly had a heart attack. At that moment, I felt like I was in the final scene of The Usual Suspects. I was gobsmacked. I offered to pay the man for his work, but he refused and laughed, saying he was young once. I am now 45, and my parents to this day still do not know that we stole the bottle, swapped it with tea, and that a poor old man drank it years later and never got paid for his honest day's work. Only in Ireland. Story 59. I was hit by another child with a doll, which caused a bruise that became infected, swelled, and blocked my airway. I had to have a couple of surgeries and was quarantined from the other children because they did not know what it was. 20 years later, my dentist told me it was Ludwig's angina. Story 60. I figured out my dad was not on a business trip in 2005. He was at my uncle's wedding in Ireland and did not want to take me because he knew I would want to go if he told me. In hindsight, I probably should have picked up on the lie. My dad is a school custodian. Note: people are curious why he did not take me. I had been to Ireland before because my dad is from Dublin. I was a bad flyer as a child because I would get severe ear infections and he only left for 4 days, so he did not think it was worth it. A school custodian is, at least in New York City public schools, essentially the manager of the janitorial staff. I did eventually get to go to a wedding in Ireland in 2018, which felt like some redemption. Story 61. For years I had nightmares. Every dream featured my older sister as a robot trying to kill me. She appeared as a tank, transformer-like machines, a metallic spider, or other robots covered in knives and sharp objects. Every metallic robot I could imagine had my sister's face. I had only these dreams throughout elementary school. The mystery was solved when I mentioned them at 17. I was born extremely premature at 4 months with many complications. After I was born, I spent 5 months in the neonatal intensive care unit, where I received extensive medical attention, underwent multiple surgeries, and had a feeding tube placed. My mother was sad that I could not meet my sister and that my sister, who was 4 at the time, could not meet me. So she placed a picture of my sister's face above my incubator so I could see her. It was a sweet idea, but it caused my brain to associate my sister's face with the only things I knew then: surgical tools and ominous hospital equipment. It took us a long time to understand what those nightmares meant. Story 62. I was young at the end of the Vietnam War and confused why adults were fascinated by peas and peace talks. Years later, I realized they were talking about peace talks. Story 63. When I was 12 or 13, I had a horrifying experience one night. I woke up fully awake, not dreaming, and felt as if I were encased in transparent concrete. I could only move my eyes, and although I was breathing, I could not control it. Everything was bizarre, and I sensed a malevolent presence in the corner of my room, but I could not turn to look. This went on for what felt like hours. I was drenched in sweat and felt as if I were suffocating because my adrenaline had surged, but I could not increase my respiration. After trying to scream many times, I finally managed to squeak. I kept forcing sounds until I was screaming, but my family did not come to check on me. After more attempts, I began to move again. I broke out of the encasement and realized what I had thought was screaming was a barely audible whisper. I did not wake my family because I had nothing to tell them that would not be dismissed as a bad dream. I did not go back to sleep that night, and I developed horrific insomnia for decades. Until in my 40s, I saw a documentary about people who said they had been abducted by unidentified flying objects. It was a dry, fact-based documentary, and experts explained that many such abductees were actually experiencing sleep paralysis. My jaw dropped. I called my wife in because I had told her about my supernatural experience, and we listened as scientists described my experience exactly. This clinical description, finally available after decades, changed my life. My sleep began returning to normal and my mental health improved. In summary, I had an episode of sleep paralysis when I was a preteen, before the internet, and my traumatic mystery and insomnia persisted until I learned about sleep paralysis from a documentary in my 40s. Story 64. There was a children's show that we had on 2 VHS video home system tapes when I was a child. I believe each tape had only 2 episodes, though it may have been 3 or 4. As far as I know, this series never aired on any television channel. The show began with a grandmother puppet telling a story, then shifted to a dream world made of quilted blankets inhabited by cute puppet animals. A human child puppet would visit that world and help the animal puppets resolve their problems. The show taught simple lessons for young children. I last watched it around 1996 or 1997 and searched for it for years without success, which was frustrating. Finding pre-internet material can be difficult, but the entire series is on YouTube now. I found it by searching for a single episode title I remembered from about 3 years ago. Haste Makes Waste. The show is called The Land of Pleasant Dreams. If you have children, try playing it for them. They might enjoy it. Story 65. I watched a movie once when I was very young and homesick from school. I could hardly remember any of it, only some bizarre details. With the advent of the internet, I tried to find the movie to no avail. Then, on a random Reddit thread, someone mentioned the detail I remembered. The mystery was solved. The movie was Krull. All I could recall was a man throwing a magic dagger at a giant monster and someone turning into a tiger. It was not worth celebrating. The movie was terrible. Never meet your heroes. Story 66. When I was 7, I was visiting the Philippines and let my cousins play my Pokemon Yellow cartridge while we hung out. Later, I booted the game and found my save file had been overwritten. I cried to my mom because I had lost my save data. I had about 100 hours at that point, so it felt like a punch in the gut for a small child. Neither cousin admitted doing it, so I had to move on. A few years later, I was speaking with another cousin, and he told me that when he had started Pokemon Yellow, he later booted the game and suddenly had all the badges and high-level Pokemon. He had hung out with my cousins back when I thought I lost my save data, and they had somehow mixed up our cartridges. I have put my name on all my handheld game cartridges ever since. Story 67. Turns out I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Edit. So you all who were diagnosed late and are over 20 want to be rant buddies? Okay, cool. Story 68. I begged my parents to let me attend a regular school when I reached high school age. I had been homeschooled. They kept saying my math programs did not line up correctly and I might get held back an extra year if I tried to go. But we could think about it. I realized recently that this was not completely true. They just did not want me to attend a regular school. I do not know why I only just realized this. I am thankful for everyone's replies. It seems there are many people with similar experiences. Story 69. My sister had a friend sleep over one night, and they threw spit wads at the bathroom ceiling. I was sleeping in my room and was woken in the morning by my furious mother. I was yelled at, placed under restrictions, and lost my allowance. I had no idea what had happened. My little sister watched and said nothing. Years later, when the three of us were having lunch, the incident came up and my sister finally confessed. We laugh about it now. Story 70. A family friend worked on several Broadway musicals in the costuming department, and I was always begging her to tell me how they did the Beast transformation scene in Beauty and the Beast because it looked like literal witchcraft to child me. She would not tell me, saying it was a secret. We reconnected as adults, and I brought it up while we were talking about a Disney princess cosplay I wanted to commission and her time doing Disney musicals. I did not bring it up out of the blue, and she finally told me. They used a second performer dressed as the Beast to fight Gaston while the main actor had all the makeup removed. I laughed. Story 71. I stepped on the scale when I was 5, and it read about 130 pounds. I couldn't believe I had grown that much in one day. I spent the next 2 hours trying to convince my mother I was a big boy, stepping on the scale repeatedly, around 150 times. Each time it showed about 100 pounds less. Years later, I realized my father had stepped on the scale behind me as a joke. Story 72. My older brother and his friends used to tell a story about a deranged military veteran who shot an entire local family. They said the killer was upset after being denied permission to hunt on a farmer's property. He returned with a shotgun, killed the farmer in his barn, then went to the house and shot the rest of the family in their beds. There were more gruesome details, but that was the gist. Of course, this frightened 8-year-old me. I assumed it was an urban legend and thought about it now and then as an adult. A few times over the years, I reached out to local law enforcement, media outlets, and other parties to try to verify or disprove the story. This fall, I received an email from someone working in the research library of a county historical museum. Turned out to be true. The killings took place in the neighboring township, about 15 minutes from our home by car, and a little over a decade before I was told about them. I have been invited to go to the research library to review their files on the case, and I plan to do so once the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic subsides. Story 73. When I was a child, I believed in Santa Claus. As I moved through elementary school, I became more skeptical of his existence. One fact kept me believing longer than most children. How did every adult have their story straight? Every adult could name the reindeer, say where Santa lived, describe how he got around, what he wore, how his toys were made, and what you get for being naughty. How could it be a lie when everyone knew these exact details? It would have to be a massive cover-up, possibly organized through secret meetings held by the government that only adults could attend. I wondered for years how they could coordinate such an elaborate lie. I finally broke when, one year, I asked Santa for coal and instead got charcoal, the same kind my parents kept in the garage. I interrogated my parents and they had to admit it was all a lie. Every fact they knew about Santa came from stories, songs, movies, and television. There was no corporate conspiracy, Only a bunch of adults who had heard far too many shopping mall winter playlists. Story 74. When I was in elementary school, we were learning about different cultures and the folklore associated with them. I have a decent amount of Irish in my blood, so naturally I perked up when they started talking about Ireland and, more specifically, leprechauns. Our teacher told us a tale about leprechauns and how much they loved flower petals, and that if they were ever caught they would give you a gift in exchange for their freedom. So naturally I started hatching a plan. Once I got home, I told my mom all about what I had learned and how I was going to catch a leprechaun and get a gift. I picked some flower petals from my mom's garden, grabbed a plastic cup, a length of string, and a stick and set up in the backyard. I had my trap in place, lay down on the grass, and watched intently for a leprechaun to wander by, drawn to the smell of the freshly picked petals. About an hour passed and I started to doze off. I do not know how long I had been asleep, but when I awoke the cup was tipped over and my trap had been sprung. I could not believe how lucky I was. I was so excited and put my ear up to the cup to hear if anything was squirming around inside. It was silent. As I lifted up the cup, my heart sank because, of course, there was no leprechaun underneath. But hidden in the grass under the cup was a small green boot. I was so excited because I thought, well, I did not catch a full leprechaun, but of course he will want his boot back. I ran inside and told my mom the whole story. She convinced me to write the little guy a note and to give him his boot back, and perhaps he would give me a gift in return. I pulled out some loose leaf paper and a pen and wrote the shoeless leprechaun a note. I told him that in exchange for his boot, I would want a gift in return. I placed the boot on top of the note and left it on the kitchen table. I also made sure to leave the back door open a small gap before bed. In the morning, I rushed downstairs to see if my plan had worked. On the kitchen table, the boot was nowhere to be seen, but in its place was a Power Rangers action figure that I had been begging my parents for. I was so excited and took it to show and tell, telling everyone at school that I had made a deal with a leprechaun in exchange for my new favorite toy. Life went on, years passed, and my belief in magic faded along with the memory. Years later, when I was in college, we moved out of my childhood home, and during the move we all took the time to go through a bunch of our old things. I was helping my mom with one of her memory keepsake boxes, and she was telling me about the different items and what memories were attached to them. At the bottom of the box was a little green piece of felt that had been cut and sewn into the shape of a boot. The memory of that day came rushing back to me as I finally realized the effort my mom had gone through to make a little boy believe in magic. It is my favorite childhood memory now and one of the most impactful moments in my life. I still get teary-eyed thinking about it and hope to do little things like that for my kids because small gestures really do make a difference. Love you, Mom. In short, I thought I had caught a leprechaun's boot and exchanged it for a toy. Years later, I realized my mom had set the whole thing up to help her son believe in magic. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.